All right, good morning. It is 2 minutes past 9. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks you to all the panelists and IDOE for setting this up. My name is Oscar Gutierrez with Boundary Management Consultants. We have been conducting these webinars for IDOE for a little over a year. Over the last year, we found a lot of topics regarding finance and financing of schools. We decided this year to pivot from the financing and more into the facility construction and renovations, which is a little bit of out of our scope, and decided to invite some experts to lead that discussion. We understand that it is early in the morning and a lot of the potential attendees are tending to announcements and other matters as this recording is going on, and we are recording it. IDOE will post the link and pass the recording on to all of the charter schools to ensure that this valuable information is available to them. But with that, I'll turn it over to Bea Pacheco, who is our representative at IDOE, to kick us off, and then we'll get started. Bea?
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. This is Bea Pacheco. As Oscar mentioned, I am a charter school grant specialist at IDOE, and we are so happy that you are joining us today. Our team is thrilled to be able to partner with Boundary and with the great panelists to discuss how to evaluate a new charter school building webinar. So if you have any insight or any feedback, as well as attendees, we are happy to take those into consideration because we are definitely here to help and service your needs. So without further ado, thank you, Oscar. Thank you, team. And we can go ahead and begin.
All right, so I introduced myself, but our lead moderator today will be David Rosenberg, and I'll turn it over to him and allow to announce the panel and let him take control of the meeting at this point. David?
Yeah, thanks, Oscar. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So as Oscar mentioned, I am David Rosenberg, co-founder of the Center for Innovative Education Solutions. We call ourselves CEAS, or CIS for short. CEAS is a nonprofit that was born out of the Mind Trust that provides back office, low-cost support services for charter schools and autonomous schools. These services include financial and CFO work, state reporting, grant and title writing, special education consulting, and most recently, facility financing and management. We have helped facilitate over $50 million in facility financing over about the last 18 months or so, saving charter schools nearly $1 million annually in debt service or lease payments that they were making. And this is funding that can be directly pumped back into the school, right into the classroom, and not being sent to out-of-state financial institutions or other financiers. I also spent time at Indianapolis Public Schools as operations officer, where I learned much of the background of charter and autonomous schools through the Innovation Network School Program. And I served with the city of Indianapolis in the mayor's office, which is an authorizer of charter schools, where we advocated on behalf of charters at the General Assembly and City County Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam Collins, a partner at Wallach, Summers and Haas.
Thanks, David. Good morning. Adam Collins with Wallach, Summers and Haas. A little bit about our firm. We're a boutique law firm here in Indianapolis with a focus on commercial real estate, but a niche practice area in public-private partnerships and public procurement, especially as it relates to the relationship between cities and developers. And where this is translated to us as cities, similar to charter schools, have a lot of the same type of issues, never enough funding, an insurmountable number of needs. And so what we've found is that our firm over the years has been able to provide what we would consider to be private sector expertise to institutions in the public sector. And so we've been involved with the facilities of a handful of schools in the Indianapolis area and have greatly enjoyed that effort. For me personally, I serve as the chair of a charter school board. What formerly used to be Lighthouse Academy and is now Victory College Prep down on Sloan Avenue, where I have the opportunity to serve with Marcy Brown Carter, who's on the board and surely going to hit me at our next board meeting for almost saying Lighthouse here. But it's been a great opportunity for me to kind of see a little bit behind the curtain and all the struggles that schools have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and especially the challenges that facilities can provide to our budget. So happy to be here and look forward to hopefully providing some information that can be useful to you all as you explore what new opportunities may be out there.
Paul?
Yeah, thank you, David. And thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm Paul Okeson. I'm the Executive Vice President for Garmong Construction and Garmong Development Company, which is an Indiana-based construction management firm and associated real estate development organization. Like many of the other panelists, I have enjoyed a past in both state and local government, and in particular with the city of Indianapolis, where, as David mentioned, was an authorizer of charter schools and became quite familiar with some of the challenges that face charter schools as opposed to some traditionally funded public schools as it relates to their revenues. We've translated that into our construction operation and have enjoyed helping at this particular time, Seven Oaks bring a renovation to a charter school online and really understand the nuanced differences between that charter world and the traditional public school world in terms of available funds and how to narrowly craft a budget. But look forward to digging in today and talking to you a little bit more about evaluating the new construction, potential new construction for a charter school. So with that, I'll turn it back over to David.
Thanks, Paul. So setting the stage, no matter where you are in the life cycle of your school, if you're a network school that is looking to grow, if you're a single site school in your first couple of years, there's a few things that run the gamut and are the same between all of these schools. And so we just want to talk about those similarities before we kind of start dissecting the difference of whether you want to build new, whether you do expansion or renovation, but kind of setting the stage here. We started at CEAS, we started our facility financing and management work because we work closely with charter schools every single day, seeing their financials. And we saw the strain that facilities could have on the school itself. We know you are great educators and you don't want or need to be real estate experts. What you need is a good facility that you can afford and can be open and ready when you want to start school. But you have to do more with less every day, fewer staff dedicated to operational issues like facilities, and there's also no dedicated funding from the state for facilities. So all of these have caused, the urgency of opening a building, less staff, less money. All of these have kind of caused charter schools in certain circumstances to enter into facility deals that were not sustainable and either put them into a building that does not fit the educational needs or, a financial deal that they couldn't afford long term. And in fact, nationally, according to the Center for Educational Reform, one of the top 5 reasons charter schools close are because of facilities, either bad deals or the inappropriate setting. And so we've seen kind of these schools all across the board, the ones that work, the ones that don't. And those are kind of the common themes that we've seen that we want to talk about. And so how do you build your home of the future for your students, families, and staff?
And David, before you move on to that next point, I think one thing, at least from my end, it's worth emphasizing is, no one should feel bad about not being an expert here. I mean, I sit in on our board meetings and I'm constantly lost when it comes to discussions of the academics and curriculum and all the things you're doing doing day to day. So, but as David mentioned, it's important to recognize that probably your second biggest expense after personnel is going to be your facilities. So, I think we highly encourage you not to necessarily become that expert yourself, but find a way to get smart about it just because of the tremendous impact it has on your budget on an annual basis and, the fixed costs you're likely facing for the next 20 or 30 years.
No, good point. And so I will admit, when I was putting this together, I did not intend to make this ABC reference here, but it just kind of came together. I was putting it there. So, our team, and I say our team, which includes CEAS, folks like Oscar as financial advisor, Adam as real estate attorney, and Paul on the design and construction side. We've been successful in helping schools with these kind of 5 points that again, run through any deal that you may have. First and most important is you need to assemble the necessary team members to do the due diligence with the schools. we have spent many years not only with our work with schools, but also, our experience outside of school, both with municipalities and local governments and on the business side, developing these relationships and partnerships that now benefit the charter schools we work with. We know the experts in each area, and the partnerships keep those costs low, below market rate. Our goals, as Adam said earlier, is to pull private sector talent to the nonprofit world at nonprofit costs. And I think we've been very successful keeping those costs low for schools. Secondly, we need to work hand in hand with Bondry and Oscar's team to build the right school for the right deal for the school itself. There's a litany of ways to build the right financial deal for the school, and like I said, Oscar's team are the experts at that. I know this group has had discussions on that previously, but it all depends on the school being a slow growth building. If you're building a new building, renovating existing facilities, or expanding, we know the team and the right financial tools to pull into place to help you find the deal that fits both in the short term and your short-term affordability, but also your long-term needs that you can grow into. The third point there, closing the right financing for the school. Again, we know the market. We've spent time, investors all over the country, the CDFIs, and other players that can deliver the deal that we help build you, both financially there. And then after we get the financial deal right, start looking deeply into the design of the building for the school's long-term sustainability. So this is a big process. It's absolutely key, on par with the right financing, but ensuring that your needs long-term are able to be put into the building today. Not only the educational model, but all the amenities you need for the school, the number of classrooms, your goals for the students, anything else critical to your specific operation has to be fleshed out, at this point. And whether it's built now or well as built in the future, you have to have that capacity in place to be able to be in that building long term. And the last point there, execute the design and build the facility. And this is where Paul's team really comes in, and they're a true partner with the school, hand in hand, making sure they're throughout the construction process are working with the team, giving options to school leaders and the board, and protecting the students and staff that are on site during construction. And so I'll turn it over to Adam or Paul for any comments on those items before we move on to the next.
David, I would just say as an add-on to that while these are alphabetically in order on your bullet points, that not to necessarily think of these things as in their chronological order of occurrence. Obviously, to get to Oscar's plate and close for the right financing deal, sometimes it may be necessary to understand a budget for constructability on what you want to build, and to bring that to light so that you understand what kind of funds or resources you need. So just a comment there that it depends. And there's an alternative process too, where you can determine the availability of funds and work backwards from that. And sometimes we call that designing to a budget, which can work out really well as well.
And so as I mentioned, presentation focused on building a new facility. Again, this may not be right for every single school. For newer schools, it's definitely harder to get financing to go out and build a new facility. So our team will be presenting another webinar in coordination with IDOE and Bondry on September 2nd on how to evaluate an old building, where we can dig into some of those topics. Again, what we've discussed up to this point is kind of a common thread, regardless of whether you're looking to build new or looking at an old building. Finding that team, having the right interest and project manager on your team is really important, that someone's representing you as the school so you can focus on educating kids. But if you're still interested in building a new facility moving forward, this presentation will highlight what you need to focus on, the benefits and potential pitfalls, and how we can help build the right team to represent you throughout that process. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul to weigh in on some of these considerations of a new build versus the renovation, and then we can kind of jump into the different phases that we look at.
Thanks, David. I think it's been outright stated, or at least intimated a few moments ago and early on in this presentation, that recognition that in the charter school world, capacity may be an issue, right? So, and usually I mean that from a capacity of personnel. the ability to tackle a new school project, in addition to focusing on the vision of educating children, which is where your focus should be, right? So the idea of establishing a team may make a lot of sense, sort of ensuring yourself a complete turnkey approach when evaluating building a new school. A new facility, as it's been stated, may not be right for everybody, but also may be a necessity for some. And we are, without a doubt, in sort of a somewhat unprecedented market right now in terms of supply and demand interruptions, cost increases. So it's even more challenging to understand what your options may be today, and finding the right team that can help you be creative and evaluate the marketplace, help you determine the appropriate timing of when to start. That's become more important now than it ever has been. When you go out to bid may determine the success or failure of the project against your budget, based on the availability of resources and subcontractors in the market. But ultimately, you're going to have to start with some sort of feasibility, which typically will involve a team that has the right design firm on it, building a program, which is basic understanding of the needs for the school, how many classrooms, space utilization, kitchen areas, things of that nature, and really working from that program into some specific design elements. In that same team having the right construction partner on it, should be engaging the subcontractor marketplace at the same time, helping evaluate constructability and affordability, right? As I said on the previous slide, at the end of David's alphabet soup, right? Sometimes what we call designing to a budget can work well for a school. So understanding your availability of funds up front and then working backwards and figuring out how to force the path of design to fit that budget can be effective. And the other way around is to do a complete evaluation and needs assessment and build a design from that, and then price it out on the marketplace and sort of have a definitive appreciation of what resources you will need. I think at some point we'll get into some of the construction delivery options, but needless to say, there are several ways to sort of attack this challenge. But I think many of you may find, based on your capacity, that identifying the partnership with the right team that has a comprehensive offering of talents from financing to legal to design and construction, and potential maybe even leaseback options is something that can be considered, and you may find extremely beneficial to you in terms of capacity of resources from a personnel perspective.
And Paul, if I can, I want to maybe just drill in on one thing you said, because I think it's critical with the kind of market we have right now, which, as you said, is incredibly dynamic as it relates to pricing and availability. It seems to me that for folks in the charter school space, similar to as you, David, and I spent time in government, the critical issue is certainty, right? So I want to know what it is I'm going to spend and what I get, and not have to go either back to the public body or find, other cash, which in this case often isn't available. And so, I think as we're talking about common pitfalls and, things for people to consider, getting that number right from the very beginning, as Paul said, having the right partner to ensure they've accounted for things like construction lead times and, where the price of steel is headed and everything else, are even more important than they have been, over the course of the last 5 years, just because things can change so dramatically. And I don't know if it's possible, Paul, just to give everybody, a scale of what we're dealing with right now, of how much extra contingency you have to carry or anything like that as it relates to where the market is. Apologize in advance for putting you on the spot there, but
no,
I think everybody doesn't understand it.
Yeah, it's obviously of current or of late, a common topic of discussion, and you're wise to point it out. I think lead times and cost increases are at nearly unprecedented levels, and that makes it really challenging, especially when you're trying to fit maybe some construction in over a very precise period of time and be ready to open for school in the following school semester or year. Your first point about lead times, I can give maybe a couple of quick examples, but basic items used in construction that you used to be able to call on a Friday and have 40,000 square feet of insulation by the following Friday is now an 8-week or 10-week lead time. Things as basic as paint have become very difficult to come by of late in large quantities and specific types. And so paint, which has never really been, at least in my 12 years in the industry, been considered a lead item, but yet there it is. Bar joists are on a 40-week lead time right now. If you're doing anything with any precast panels or structures, some of those can be over 6 months lead time. So really understanding that and having the right partner who can help from the design perspective, appreciate what the realities are in the marketplace as it directly relates to supply and demand is critically important. We've seen more sort of schedules and budgets blown in the last year on projects just based on not the right partnership and not the right timing and connectivity between construction and design to really appreciate that. But it can be evaluated, it can be understood with the right team members, and I think it's one of those things that's critically important in today's market if you're considering new construction. I think the second thing I would say about that is when to build. There's, in the last 2 years, the timing on when you put the job out to the marketplace to try and get feedback from subcontractors to bid on it, and when you start construction has become very, very important, critically important to the success of the project. You don't want to be trying to go out and establish your budget and do bids in the middle of the summer right now because everyone's busy. The demand is far exceeding the capacity of subcontractors' ability to meet it. And so gaining interest from the subcontracting marketplace to even bid on a job is a challenge. And so you want to make sure that the timing is right there and that you have a partner that has the capacity and the talent and the understanding to guide you through that part of the process.
It's definitely unprecedented, something, but we'll move forward on our slides here. And, all of this is kind of baked into these different phases, and some of this we'll reiterate moving forward with some of the new. So in this general fact-finding phase, you need the experts around the table for a lot of the considerations that Adam and Paul were just discussing. You need your financial advisor. In assembling that team, starting those discussions and doing that due diligence will help, you determine the path that you need to take, whether it's, design build, whether it's building the budget, what's right for your situation. And we've had in-depth discussions with these schools and have helped them, find the right path for them. As I mentioned earlier, determining the needs of the school, number of classrooms, the student, how you see that building, working for you over the next few decades, because we know this is not a short-term investment. And then, working hand in glove with Oscar's team on determining the budget, the financial analysis. And so, like I said, we harp on this. We know it's part of the earlier slides, but this fact-finding due diligence phase, getting everything on the table is critically important to the success of the project. Because once you jump in and you start spending money and having advisors on board, you get in pretty deep. And so we need to make sure that we're doing it the right way. We have the right team, right numbers to make it successful for your school. But I'll turn over to Adam and Paul as we work through the exploratory phase and then the transactional phase itself.
Yeah, and David, I might again hit just one point on the teaming as everybody's thinking about this. A couple of different things. David, I'll ask you the question here in a second of, where have schools found sources of funds in order to put that kind of teaming together? Because, I think what we see a lot of times, not just in schools and organizations, are people come back and, they're hesitant to spend money before they really get too far. We think the smart money is spent early. That helps you kind of define where you're headed, where your budget is, what you can afford, what just shouldn't be on the table. and that's a good way to move forward and make sure that, you're not trying to play catch up after the fact. I'll tell you, just in my profession, lawyers, sometimes people think lawyers need to get paid every month. And while we like to, most of our transactional folks will carry those costs until they get to the end of the project. So, I think what we see in the market is people are willing to take risk, and to help you figure out this problem and to have a motivation to do it. But you got to ask, and present. And so, David, again, back to my point, I just say, what are the sources of kind of like pre-construction or pre-project capital that people have identified in the past that you've seen?
Yeah, there's certainly grants, from some of the philanthropic foundations that have been out there. There's some CDFIs that will do some work, early on. What I like about this group and, working with Adam, working with Oscar and Paul, we will do a lot of the work in advance, not getting paid until closing. I know Oscar has done deals, Cease has done deals that are fully contingent on closing. And so we are fully at risk all the way through the process. That doesn't profession, but finding the team, as Adam said, you don't know until you asking the question. But we will come in and start the work and do it, just on the basis that we think we can provide a good deal for the school at the end of the day. If at any point the school or the board pulls the plug, that's our risk. We don't get paid. And so I think, again, finding the right team, people you trust, people who have the best interest of the school in mind, is most important in this early phase. And we may be able to bring philanthropic dollars, working with Marcy's group, they may be able to bring philanthropic dollars. So I think there's different avenues that the early investment of funds should not scare any school away from starting the work and starting the fact-finding phase.
So as we look at what David's termed here, the exploratory phase, and as I think Paul made the good point earlier, which is, these things don't necessarily happen in a linear fashion. You kind of have to take them along parallel paths pretty quickly to determine, what might be best. If anything needs to actually start first, it's probably the budgetary conversation, because, we always end up in that space, and we know that charter schools don't have unlimited funds. But just to, as we talk through these, to give you an idea of the kind of things we typically evaluate when we look at these. So potential ownership options, lease or buy. Frankly, in the charter school space, leases tend to not be all that favorable. I would say the only kind of situation where I'd really look at a lease is where perhaps, you're looking for a short-term period of time in a facility until you can get somewhere on your own. So that kind of less than 10 years, I just have a brand new charter, need to get started, don't have a ton of capital, or the market doesn't think I have a lot of credit. That's a really good time to lease. The other, I think, option where we've seen leases be successful are where there's been a partnership with the landlord. So, we worked on one facility where there was a partnership with, the ownership structure is a little different. I won't get into details, but they partnered with the neighborhood community organization in order to provide access to athletic fields and stuff like that benefited both parties. We've looked at higher ed partnerships where there's been some benefit there. So again, that's another indication or another situation where I would look at a lease and say, yeah, it's probably a little bit more favorable. But generally speaking, most landlords, if it's just a charter school facility, are going to make you responsible for all the operation, kind of long-term maintenance of a facility, which is really the benefit to renting. It's no different when you look at it from a home ownership perspective. So, given the fact that we're looking at schools, that location is branding to the is part of your branding and part of your revenue model. I think our recommendation the majority of the time is to look to kind of own and control your own destiny, mainly because you're not getting any help. If the boiler goes down, you're still going to be responsible for it. So, unless somebody's kind of augmenting your credit there, it really doesn't make much sense to lease rather than to buy. When we talk about renovations versus new, again, to draw the kind of the analogy to what we think about as home ownership, if you're looking at a renovation project and it's really just, some finishes, paint, those kind of things, that's not a big renovation project. And that's something that, myself on the school board, as a school board member would consider and not be that concerned about. But when you start to get into these really gnarly renovations and, you're replacing wiring, and now we're dealing with asbestos, and, we're going to have to add an HVAC system. Like, it can be done, but you just need to understand what the impact is going to be. Financially, it's going to be an impact. The team can help you get that straightened out. I would say, when you get into a renovation, there's a lot more opportunity probably for delay, just in terms of we found something new and now we have to adjust. And I feel like on the renovation side too, it also just requires a lot more day-to-day management from the school, because you're involved, you're in it, you're part of the mix. You have to make decisions, additional things are happening, additional budget items might be needed. So it can be a very interactive process. One area where I think that renovations are perhaps for a new facility, more desirable than a new construction is when you talk about timing. So, Paul gave us an indication lead time, of things, 8 weeks, 40 weeks. Yeah, I mean, it's really gotten absurd. And I think the construction schedules have really lengthened on projects. So, if we're talking right now and it's in August and you want to be open next year, you probably have time to get everything done if you really hustle and make it happen. But if you're on a shorter time frame, and a lot of times we see charter schools need to be in a facility in 6 months or 9 months, that's going to make it very difficult for you to do a new build. So in that case, you might have the ability to renovate, take on an existing facility, get started when classes need to be open in August, and then continue some of the renovations throughout the process. So it's really kind of schedule dependent and determined. The other thing I'll just add here is, like, if you're going to do a renovation rather than a new build, like, you got to be prepared to penny pinch. I mean, that just has to be in your DNA. And I know most of our charter school leaders, it is, you always stretch the dollar as far as possible, but you're going to have to flex that muscle there, because there are going to be unknown, unexpected things that are just much more likely to come up in a renovation than in a new build. As we look at onsite or offsite, I think the real key here is to have somebody who understands what you can do on site. So if your building layout's not going to be efficient, if you don't have enough room for parking, if you're not going to have, all those things are going to be a factor. So considering on-site, for me, it's always preferable. It's probably less overhead and administrative load per classroom than if you have two different facilities, but you got to have the land in the area to be able to do it properly and factor in the total cost of that operation. In terms of real estate, experts, how to work with your team, there are really a couple different people you need to have. Sometimes you're going to have a real estate broker. Their role is to help you identify the site, give you an idea of what comparable purchase price is, help you negotiate, know what market terms are. And that's kind of a limited scope there. Now, the other thing is we see a lot of people bring on real estate brokers and they're like, hey, I've got a relationship with this guy, goes to my church. He's the best, commercial downtown office broker. Well, that can work. But generally speaking, you want somebody who's knowledgeable either in your geographic area or the space you're working in. And so, trying to match those skills to your needs will be important. As it relates to lawyers, their role is to help you kind of just manage the process, to get all the paperwork that needs to be done. But really what you're going to get from a good lawyer is an understanding of, what the risks are associated with this potential site. So title and survey, there are two other team members. Anytime we're involved in the acquisition or construction of a new project, you have a title, insurance, survey work done. They'll help you negotiate all of the kind of, administrative minutia of purchasing a piece of ground, and should be able to do that relatively quickly and competently. The other piece that I think, is critical from a real estate side, and whether that's a, design professional, whether that's an owner's rep or whether that's developer, is having somebody who knows and can go look and tell you, like, what's going to fit in your site and what's going to be possible. You want that person in and involved as quickly as possible, because, we get down this route, we've put down earnest money, you've spent money on lawyers, you've gone through this whole thing, and then we find out that the site's not big enough, or it's going to account for an inefficient layout or not have enough parking. you really have an issue and it gets to be, problematic. So understanding that as early as possible is helpful. As it relates to construction methods, Paul, I don't know if you can give us maybe an overview of like what the most common methods. My assumption is, here we're talking about a developer-led model, maybe a construction management model. I don't know if design to build is really applicable here, but what are the models that you see used most frequently in this kind of setting?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I want to dive into that. I want to step back just 1 minute on something that I think is important as it relates to evaluating renovation versus a new build. One of the biggest things I think we find in the renovation side of construction is you can't underscore enough the challenges of the potential unknowns, but that increases exponentially as you look at the age of the facility you're renovating, right? And we see a lot of charter schools that are in buildings that are past probably a 30, 40 year cycle of life. And the as-built plans or the plans that are given to the owner of the building after it's been constructed, the greater the age of the building, the less likely that there's accuracy in those plans. When you pierce a wall to do some mechanical, electrical or plumbing work, you may identify some things that from a code perspective, you may be then required to address. So the unknown expenses, I know you touched on it. I just wanted to really underscore that's a huge challenge in renovations, especially for charter schools who are working off of maybe a razor thin budget for these type of renovation goals. So it's just, new build is always a little bit cleaner. The second thing that you want to consider too is the interest in the marketplace. It's been our experience here and really through 2018 and forward, the subcontractor marketplace is usually more interested in a new construction project as opposed to a renovation project, right? It's a cleaner process. There's less critical path activity typically on a new construction project. And so you don't have different trades crawling all over each other inside an existing building. And so you tend to get a little bit more interest from the marketplace on a new build versus a renovation for what that's worth. To go back to your question about delivery methods, I think it's important if you are working with a developer-led team to evaluate the design talent, the architectural talent and capability that they bring to the table, and the construction team that they bring to the table. As I stated in our introductions, Garmong has both a development company, financing capability, and real estate capability along with our construction company. And so understanding both sides of the coin can be of benefit to a charter school client. But there's other things to consider. You mentioned design build. That may afford you the opportunity to move along a little bit faster, at least by perception. But it also gives you some challenges in terms of control of the design. You're likely to establish a guaranteed budget early on in the process without having a full set of design documents to understand really what the construction costs are going to be. There's different levels of construction management. And then these can exist within a developer-led model as well as independent, where the charter school may want to go out and procure their architecture and engineering separately, and then procure construction services separately as well. So you may have construction manager. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Can you take one step back and explain what
Sure.
delivery method means as you're going through them? Just because what that means, delivery method to the and then you can go through them. Thank you.
Yeah, and what I might do in addition to that, Oscar, is provide a link to a presentation. We do this quite a lot in our industry. It has a breakdown of the different delivery methods, and it'll provide an organizational structure so that it's pretty easy for the owner to understand. But so in design build, you're hiring a design builder, and that usually is a construction-led team where the architect reports into the construction company and not directly to the owner. There's usually some criteria developed, sometimes up to as much as maybe 30% of a design, and basically a price or a guaranteed maximum price and fee set are given for that portion of design, and then it's sort of moves along through that process. And I kind of liken it to building the airplane while it's in the air, but it does afford people speed. But at the same time, you've still got 70% of the design to figure out inside an already known budget. Construction management. This is where the owner would hire an architect on their own. In our opinion, in our experience, it's good to have a construction manager hired relatively at the same time to sort of work in coordination and in concert with the owner and the designer, engaging the subcontractor marketplace early on in the design process to bring back real-time feedback along with any historical information that a good construction partner might have from doing similarly situated charter schools. There's two types of construction management. There's what we call CMA, which is construction manager as agent or advisor, some people call it. In that particular type of relationship, the subcontractor contracts are held by the owner, in this case, the charter school, and the construction manager sort of advises, moves along, helps establish the bid packages, runs the bidding process. And then there's construction management at risk, or construction manager as constructor, which is what we call it in Indiana under state statute. But the at-risk sense is that unlike CMA, all of the subcontracts are held by the construction company and not the owner, which gives the owner a little bit of a risk transfer there, or really a significant amount of risk transfer. It establishes what we call a guaranteed maximum price. You'll hear people use the term GMP a lot to refer to that. But I think that it's important to evaluate what's in that guaranteed maximum price and what's not in that guaranteed maximum price. And we've said it before, but identifying the right partner becomes critically important in understanding these relationships and really understanding what is it I'm getting for my procurement here in this process. But the guaranteed maximum price can be negotiated to where any leftover savings can be split between the constructor and the owner, or in some cases, what we do often at Garmong is simply revert all of those unused funds back to the owner. Especially in this case, you're a charter school and every penny counts. Not to suggest that other owners aren't quite that frugal, but the need to be here is of paramount essence. I don't know if build, operate, transfer works its way into this conversation or not, but really all of these delivery methods that I've discussed can be used underneath a developer-led agreement or a build, operate, transfer agreement. A build, operate, transfer is a public acronym that really means a developer-led project. And I think you have to evaluate what's the best option for you as an owner. My suggestion would be to not get so married with a delivery method, but really identify the right partner first that has experience in the creative and innovative ways in which a charter school has to address construction and funding, and then work collaboratively between the professionals on that team to understand what's the best way to attack the project at hand. Because they all have differences and they really are unique from one another. And it's a matter of understanding what's going to fit best or be mutually beneficial for the charter school and the construction or development concern.
And, I think Paul does them all, or a variety of them. So it's a question, of what works best. And I think his point of good is find somebody who can tell you what meets your goals. I would just say in the, somewhat, advice given, having sit on your side of the table and having to build a facility with limited resources and limited expertise. I think the two things that were always critically important to us, and we've shown have borne out, I think, repeatedly well for institutions and nonprofits, governmental units, is having, one point of contact to be responsible for. So the periodic kind of one throat to choke, or not periodic, but the proverbial one throat to choke, where it is, I don't have to try to distinguish between my architect, my contractor, who's responsible for what issue. I have one party, I go to them, I tell them, it's your problem, figure it out. And I think there's a lot that's beneficial to that, to somebody who doesn't have a full-time kind of construction or real estate staff. And
Well, I would say, just for the record, I prefer to call one body to hug as opposed to one throat to choke.
I'm going to use that from here on out.
It's going to go well, right?
The other thing that I think is critical too, as Paul talked about guaranteed maximum price, is having the ability to know what your, absolute fixed budget is. So, knowing that, being able to plan, you guys can do and set a lot. Where I think things get really dicey is where you have to, you have a budget, you think you know where it's coming in, and you've been hit with an unexpected cost increase. So any way that you can find to really dial those risks down and know what you're getting into beforehand, I'll say personally, I think is a much better option for the school.
Yeah, and I'd like to expand on that thought because it is an important one that we face frequently here at Garmong and in the industry, is when is the right time to establish your guaranteed maximum price? There's I think a trend of I won't call it misinformation, but maybe a misplaced understanding of when the GMP should be established. And you see a lot of folks talking about establishing an early GMP. And I think what I want people to understand is that the amount of funds that go to the scope of work or to the project itself versus the funds that need to stay in a contingency line item will move dramatically depending on when you decide to establish your guaranteed maximum price. And to say that more simply, the further you can get in designing your project and understanding what all the wants and needs are in your project before establishing the GMP is going to be more favorable to you as a client, so that most of your funds will go into the project itself and not be sitting, quote unquote, dead on the sidelines being used for contingency based on the risk of the unknown. So I think when you establish a guaranteed maximum price is really important. And sometimes there's a desire to try and do that early on, whether it's to meet some financing goal or to issue some debt. But I think there's some ways to move through that and get to a place where you have a much better understanding about what the scope of work is and a much greater sense of confidence that your funds will be going into the building as opposed to sitting on the sidelines.
That's a great point, Paul. So we could have a whole probably hour talking about those and the benefits, but that gives you an idea and kind of where to move on. Financing options, I'll just cover them quickly because I know Oscar's talked about these previously, but one, charitable, you see a lot of folks do capital campaigns, go and get the philanthropic dollars, to the extent you can do that, God bless, right? Like you've done great, and that'll offset the cost to the extent you're able to do that. That's incredibly positive. Bonds are probably what we've seen used the most with the schools that we've been involved with. And those are longer term, typically 30-year obligations. They come at a fixed rate, typically extremely competitive interest rate. The only kind of downside to bonds is that you have periodic refinancing. So, again, unlike your mortgage loan at your house, you can't refinance whenever you want. You're typically at a predefined period. The other thing with bonds is you have to have established credit. And so whether that means you are a school, it's on their second charter with a history of revenue and enough kind of coverage between your revenue and expenses to make you desirable to an investor, or whether you have the credit enhancement of a national organization or some local philanthropic group or whatever, that's what it's going to take to be eligible. So sometimes, while it's a great product, eligibility can be an issue. There are often bank loans that can be available. Banks are a little bit tougher just because of the risk, again, associated with charters. So you're probably going to need to be on your second charter. The terms on a bank loan are typically more flexible, but again, you don't get that 30-year, fixed rate kind of benefit. So you have to be able to manage the interest rate risk, which everyone in the world, but for homeowners, and really governments and kind of nonprofit institutions have to do. But it's just an additional thing to be aware of, and it introduces an element of risk that may not make sense for a lot of folks. The other option, I think, that's there, what these CDFIs are, and they'll leverage federal funds to come in. Sometimes they do a sale leaseback. Sometimes they just own it and provide a long-term lease to you with an option to buy. Again, that can be a way to start because they're typically less concerned about the credit you have. But what I'll tell you is that they're incredibly expensive. We worked with a school, the very first school project I worked on, that had a 5% interest rate and a 25% fee charged by the CDFI. So that's a 30% interest rate. I mean, you know, if you walked into a bank and a banker gave you that, they'd take them away in handcuffs. It'd be cheaper for me to finance a school on my credit card than it was for them to go that loan. So the one thing I just encourage you, you know, you don't have to be sophisticated about all these products. Your financial advisor and your team will help you figure it out. But one thing I would just make sure you know is what we call the difference between the cost of capital and your interest rate. Sometimes people look at the interest rate, think that's the only thing that matters. Really, you need to understand what your capital is costing you, both in the short term, you know, on an annual basis, and again over the life of the project. And so I think that's all I really had on those. I know we're getting short on time, so I'll just kind of run through this quickly. Closing process, financial and real estate. A lot of this, the vast majority of this, is going to be done by your team. And what that's going to require is some underwriting on behalf of the financial team. Sometimes you as a school leader might have to make a presentation to a ratings agency, which, you know, in projects we've worked with Oscar on, Oscar's team's kind of prepped everybody there. Everybody's going to want to know a lot of information. They're going to want to understand your operation. They're going to understand your historic revenues and expenses. They're going to want to understand if you've had any, you know, litigation claims, how those have been addressed, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a slog, but it's just kind of what you have to go through. On the real estate process, and again, I would say these all dovetail at the same time. We close on the financing typically when we close on the real estate. From a real estate perspective, usually you need about 100 and I'd say, you know, anywhere from 90 to 120 days to close. That gives you time to do due diligence on the site, title, survey, environmental, and get your lending in place. And then that also gives you some time to kind of go through, you know, and as you're working through your budget and what your either new construction or renovation plans are, make sure the project you can put forward is affordable. And so, you know, I would say most of our, you know, we're closing 90 days, 120 days, but most of these projects are 6 months in the making at a minimum. You know, I mean, it can happen faster than that, but that's just usually the amount of time it takes. So on the real estate closing process, again, not much for you to do other than just know that you'll be prepared to sign a number of documents that the lawyers prepare. So other than that, I don't think there's really anything I have. I don't know, Paul, if you want to quickly kind of address what they should expect as it relates to, you know, construction and renovation, how they integrate.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there is a process there. I think when you're doing new construction, you know, the real risk in new construction is how suitable is the land you're about to build on. You know, what do you know about the site and the location of where you want to build? Getting the appropriate environmental phase testing completed and understanding, because really in new construction, there can be an abundant amount of risk in terms of soil remediation, stabilization, things of that nature. And the unfortunate challenge there is not all environmental testing is comprehensive. The more soil borings that they take, the more expensive it is. So it is not without its unknowns and upfront costs, similar to what I described for renovation. But understanding where you're going to build and what the impacts to your overall budget are relative to the site is pretty important. But you know, like we talked about, it's really then identifying a program, outlining your needs, going through the design process and pricing it along the way, and doing a constructability review is really where the criticality is in getting to a budget.
So I'll wrap up as we are up against time. You know, other considerations, one thing to look out for is difference between urban and rural. You know, rural, you may have utility connections or other issues that come about in those settings. Urban, you may have zoning and space limitations. But again, we can't reemphasize enough, the most important thing is hiring a team of experts that know all this, that have experienced all these, both with charter schools and outside, that can build the right team, represent your interests moving forward. And so you have our emails in this presentation. Please email us questions. We're happy to to meet, talk about your potential projects and how we can be of assistance there. Also, please tune in on September 2nd for the next webinar on evaluating an older building and looking at expansion and renovation. And so with that, thank you for the opportunity from IDOE and Boundary Management Consultants. Thank you for Adam and Paul being on, and we hope to talk with you all soon. Thanks. Oscar, I think you're good.
Before you all go, if there are any questions, you can put them on the chat box and we'll try to get you all an answer for those offline. But thank you again to the panelists. Thank you, Bea, and you guys all have a great day. I'll stop the recording now.